We're so excited to do our third part of this series called Career Success Sequence. So we're more than halfway through the series. This is part 3. We will get started in just a minute. Oh, it is 6 already. So we'll welcome, like I mentioned, this is the Acing interview webinar. This is the third part of our series called Career Success Sequence. Our fourth part will be later in May, which is our mock interview, which we'll give out more details towards the end. But we're so excited that you can be here for this third part. We saw, as we mentioned, my co-presenter, we've seen some of you come to all of the parts, so we're really excited to have some of you welcome back and have some new faces also joining us. But I am Monica Cabrera. I am a CUSD College and Career Counselor, and as I mentioned, B is my co-presenter for this evening. We are going to be reviewing a lot of interesting, really cool things about the interview process. But before we do that, we want to make sure that we cover some housekeeping items. So your cameras, this is a webinar, so your cameras and microphones are completely turned off. We can't see you, we can't hear you, but the way that you can communicate with us is by using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, of the Zoom screen. And we kindly ask you to save your questions towards the end, but if you have pertinent questions, you can, our team will be able to answer them for you on the Q&A. This presentation is one of many available to you. We record all of our webinars, so all of them are available on our YouTube channel, and actually we have over 100 recorded presentations on there with really relevant information for all grade levels of high school, including some of them for students who are in middle school. So it's a really useful resource for all of you. And then another thing that I want to mention about this presentation is if you see that little chain, that means that a little chain icon, that means that it is a link resource for you. So we do have resources throughout the presentation that we want to share with you. So if you see that on the presentation and you get a copy of the presentation later on, because we will be sharing that, you can use that resource if it's, something that will be helpful for you. So I mentioned, I am a college and career counselor with Futureology, CUSD-Futureology. So I just wanted to briefly just introduce the program. So CUSD-Futureology is the district's college and career counseling program. We are a team made up of 5 people, of 5 team members. All of us are credentialed school counselors. Many of us have experience with college admissions readers. We kind of have background knowledge of that process. So we give very specific support for students who are going through that process of applying for college. We are data driven, so we're very proud of that. All of our efforts are completely data driven and informed. So we believe that all of our support is very effective because we believe in data. We provide support by meeting with students individually, with personalized counseling appointments, group events, workshops. We also do webinars like we're doing tonight. And then we also provide a lot of support in Spanish. I am the bilingual counselor. So I meet with students and families for a one-on-one personalized appointment and give you all information in Spanish if that's something that you're looking for. We meet with students and families in the evening. So if some of you have met with us, you know that we are typically available in the evening hours after school, Monday through Friday. And we have multiple ways for students to access us, either at our office at the shops in Mission Viejo, at the school sites, if there's a college and career center at your school. And then also, or if we have made a space available, and then we also meet with students online, and we provide a lot of support in a variety of different areas. Okay, so before we get to the agenda, I do want to do a poll just to kind of see who is in the room, who is joining us today. So if you can all tell me what school you're coming from, and then also what your grade level is. Okay, so I see a lot of Aliso, nice. I also see a lot of the majority here are sophomores and juniors. Okay. All right, we're still seeing some people answering, so I'll give you 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so let me end the poll there. and then share results. So the majority of the people joining us this evening are from Aliso. That's awesome. But we're seeing some representation from some of the other schools. And then also the majority of our people joining us are sophomores and juniors. Okay, very good. Very useful information for us to have as we go into the information, the session for today. So let's keep going. So the agenda for today, we are going to be going over some hiring trends in the new world of work. So I want to talk about some just really cool kind of things that are going on with in terms of trends, right? Like hiring trends and what are employers looking for, just so that we can come from a space when we're going into an interview process that this is what the world of work looks like in terms of the interviewing process. We're also going to be covering interviewing basics, and then we'll go into the different sections of the interview. So we'll talk about what to do before the interview, what to do during the interview, and then what to do after. And then we'll also share some really helpful resources. And then if you have any questions, we'll also have time at the end to answer your questions. Okay, so let's keep going. So just another kind of quick poll. I want to also make sure that we gauge where you all are at now, because that really helps me as I, what kind of information I will share with you all tonight. So if you could all just quickly tell me, have you ever interviewed before, or are you currently preparing for an interview, right? So is this just for you to learn, or is this for you to actually, get some tips for an upcoming interview? So please let us know. Some of you are getting ready for an interview or have interviewed before. Okay. And then I also do want to know what your confidence is, how prepared do you feel to handle the interview process? Because we're hoping that this webinar will help with that. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll now and just kind of share results really quickly. So the majority of you have not interviewed before or are currently preparing. So I'm really I like that you, the majority of you are here just to learn, to kind of prepare yourselves potentially being interviewed in the future. I love that. I love that y'all are, taking that initiative and actually preparing yourself for that, because interviews are a really integral part for not just for jobs, right? They're also for potentially for scholarships, for university admissions, for volunteer opportunities. So it is a really essential skill that you need to have, not just for your career. It's for a lot of different things that may come up before you go in and get your career started. So, and then also, we want to make sure that this is helpful. So thank you all for sharing that information as far as how well prepared you feel. All right, so let's keep going. So the hiring trends in the world of work, what skills and knowledge do you need to stand out? So as I was preparing for, for this presentation, what really interests me is, what are, employers, big employers, small employers, what are they actually looking for? And that kind of informs as to how you should be preparing for interviews, or I believe it clearly informs how you should be preparing for interviews. Of course, it's going to be different for each job, for each, it's going to be a different story if you're interviewing for a scholarship than it is if you're interviewing for an actual job. But I just kind of wanted to get a sense of where the world of work is at now. So if we go to the next slide, we can kind of discuss those really quickly. So, we're in the digital age. A lot of work that's happening is happening in the virtual space. So of course, digital footprint, and professional online presence is becoming more and more important and relevant as as younger people are entering into the workforce, or anybody joining the workplace right now. So I won't spend too much time talking about that because I did cover that in our first part of this series. We did do a deeper dive into what that is. So if you want to learn more about that, you can watch that webinar. But what really kind of caught my eye with what are the hiring trends, what are the global trends, what does the workplace look like? I was really intrigued by these two reports by LinkedIn. And if you don't know what LinkedIn is a professional online social media platform. It's a really cool and useful tool. If you want to learn more about it, again, I also covered that during the first part of this series. But what I found really cool from these two reports from LinkedIn was that one of the things that they mentioned in their 2022 report is that company culture is becoming more and more, increasingly more important for employees, potential employees, right? So people who are getting hired. So more so than pay, right? More so than how much they're getting paid. So it's really important for, for people who are looking for work, and especially with Gen Z and millennials, they want that flexibility, focus, and well-being, work-life balance. Mental health is really important for, for younger employees. So I thought that was really cool in terms of like there's a shift in like in that dynamic of the employer and employee, where the employee is really having more, it's being more intentional about the kinds of work that they're looking for and the kinds of companies they're looking for. So I thought that was really cool. But the one thing that I really found useful was in the 2019 report, as in regards to preparing for an interview, right? Because that's what we're talking about today. So the one thing that in this 2019 report that employers mentioned is that 80% of employers said soft skills are increasingly important for company success. And soft skills are these traits and skills that shape how you work independently or with others. So that's what a lot of employers are looking for, is these specific skills like creativity, collaboration, adaptability, all those different things that you wouldn't necessarily kind of equate with career success, right? You would think like, I need to be, for example, if you go into a job in tech, you need to know how to code, you need to know, all these different languages, coding languages. So, but that's not essentially the truth, right? It's not the complete truth. The rest of those skills are necessary. But what employers are looking for during, if we go to the next slide, during, the interview part of this process is they're looking to make sure that you have those soft skills, that you are an employee that can think, that can, problem solve, can communicate, can work with others, can have great time management, can adapt really easily, because they find that it's easy for them to find people with those hard skills. It's easy to kind of evaluate or have a system to make sure that people who are coming in for interviews have these specific hard skills, that they can video edit, they can use Microsoft Office, they can communicate via email. So those kinds of things are really easy for them to kind of filter through, and as they're reviewing resumes, right? So even before the interview, they're looking for people that have those hard skills. And so in the interview process, what they're measuring is more so whether this person is going to be have those soft skills that more and more employers are increasingly looking for, right? So I know I'm focusing a lot on, career-wise, not necessarily, I'm not speaking too much on, for example, for scholarships or universities, but universities do, for example, do gauge those kind of things, like the kind of person that you are, the kind of really important skills that you're bringing, the kind of qualities that you're bringing that are not necessarily hard skills. So it does kind of apply, but in terms of, what I'm talking about, it's more so applies to looking for a job or for your future career. So just to kind of bring it all together, I want to share another, in the next slide, I want to share another kind of quote that somebody in that report says, right? But they mentioned that, while hard skills may get a candidate's foot in the door, right? So with that resume, somebody sharing their, their skills and the hard skills that they have, that can definitely get them into an interview, right? But it's soft skills that ultimately will actually potentially get somebody hired. So the key takeaway from all of this is that hard skills are easy to identify and evaluate. Soft skills are much harder to identify. So companies will prioritize soft skills over hard skills during the interviewing process, because soft skills will usually filter out by bad hires. So they will be able to determine whether or not a person's not a good fit for, and I think B is also going to cover a little bit more of this a little later. But this filtering usually happens in an interviewing process. And I want to make sure that you all can know what this interviewing process looks like and why this is, why is this relevant to as you're potentially preparing for an interview. And then another kind of key takeaway is, if we go to the next slide, is that you're learning all these all these soft skills at school right now, right? So this is something that we kind of stress if you've been to one of our workshops. This is something that we stress a lot, is that the school to career connection is there, right? So what you're learning in school right now will help you to be successful in your career one day. You're learning a lot of really useful things in your classes, like problem solving, how to articulate ideas, time management, study skills, communication. And so I want to make sure that I stress that, because it is something that that we often forget, because school, but it's something that I want to remind you of, that you are learning really useful things in school that are going to help you with not just making your career, being successful in your career one day, but also to help you with this part of the process of the hiring process, which is the interviewing part. So that's it. I hope that was as interesting as I thought it was for you all, but I'm going to pass it on to B.
Thank you, Monica. That was all really important information. I think, Monica, can everybody hear me okay? I'm always worried that you can't hear me.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. What Monica mentioned, right? How Monica set us up for tonight is really important, because the big takeaway from that last slide was that your personality, your likability is one of the primary things that will get you hired, right? And so those soft skills are going to be very important. Please watch our first video recording of the career success sequence to get a better understanding of communication skills and 21st century skills to get a better understanding of that. But I commend all of you for being here tonight to improve upon these skills and to learn what it takes to be a good interviewer, right? You're definitely making that school career connection right now. Let's talk about interviewing basics. Let's talk about the who, what, when, where, why of the interviewing process first and foremost, okay? So if you got an interview, congratulations, that's the first step. Like Monica mentioned, it was those hard skills, those technical skills that were listed maybe on your application or on your resume that piqued their interest enough to say, you know what, this person has the skills that are required. Let's talk to them. So how did we get here? How did we land an interview? It usually starts with that application or resume process. So you did something on paper to impress them. So they know that you have the technical skills required for the job or the scholarship or the college, right? But now they need to know if you're going to be a good match for them from a personality and soft skills perspective, okay? From then, right, if that goes well, if the interview goes well, then the next step in the process would be to be selected or to be hired. So this is generally the timeline of how this process works. And sometimes for some of you, there might be multiple interviews, so keep that in mind. So what is the purpose of an interview? Okay, you can think of it in two ways, right? The first half of it is they want to know what you can contribute to the organization, to the institution, to the workplace, whatever it is that you're interviewing for. So they are interviewing you to understand you on a deeper level, above and beyond what they saw on your application or on your resume, right? They want to get a sense if you're a good match for them. Are you a good personality match? Do they think that you will fit in with their company culture? Like Monica mentioned earlier, company culture is really important both ways, right? And they are also evaluating your communication skills, but also all of those other soft skills. And again, soft skills are traits, they're character traits, right? They're not something that is like a hard skill that you can quantify, right, with numbers. It's something that you get a sense of when you're in front of somebody. So these are the things that they're trying to assess when they interview you. And on the flip side, right, for all of you, you're interviewing them. When you are in an interview, you're not getting interrogated. It is a two-way conversation. And part of that is to make sure that whatever you're interviewing for is a good match for you. Monica mentioned this article earlier, the recent one from 2022, about the increasing importance of company culture for the people who are looking for jobs, right? Gen Z is very demanding. You expect, a work culture that is going to support you for the most part. So when you are in an interview, keep in mind that you are also kind of in the driver's seat as well, and you get to determine if it's a good fit for you. So it goes both ways. So just remember that, all right? But that is the purpose of an interview, is are we going to work out okay together? Is this going to work? Let's talk to each other and feel it out, okay? So moving on from that, right, is what is the structure of an interview? Some of you in here have interviewed before, which is great. But there are generally 3 different platforms, right, that you can interview on, or by which you can interview. And typically that'll be an interview in person, right, face to face, sitting in front of a person or maybe an entire interviewing committee. It could be via telephone. It could be, you know, a casual kind of first interview first, where you're on the phone with them answering some basic questions. Or it can be online via Zoom in a platform like we're in today together, right? So you should be prepared as an interviewee for any of these possible circumstances when you're being interviewed, okay? So when you're practicing and in the process of preparing, you might want to ask them in advance what the format of the interview will be. They'll probably tell you when they schedule it with you, so that you can practice appropriately for that format. A phone interview is going to be a little bit different, right, from an interview that's in person or one that is online, okay? Now that's platforms, right? That's the way in which you'll be interviewed. Now, formats, okay? Like I said earlier, you can have a face-to-face, a one-on-one interview where it's you and maybe one other person, or maybe 1 or 2 other people. So it's a pretty small group where it's just you and maybe 1 or 2 other people. And that'll be a little bit more kind of one-on-one, and you're focused more on that particular person who's interviewing you. Another possibility when you are being asked to interview is a group interview format. And by group interview, I mean that you will be interviewing for the same thing as other people who will also be there with you in the same room. So for those of you who have ever maybe interviewed for leadership positions, or for a club position, or maybe something in your community, maybe you participated in a group interview where you're sitting there with 3 or 4 other people who are interviewing for the same thing. And that's a completely different vibe, right? So that's something that you'll want to know in advance, is what kind of format is it? Is this face-to-face, one-on-one, or is it a group interview where you are going to be interviewing with other people, where your answers will come right before or after somebody else's answer to the same question? And part of that purpose is for them to interview a lot of people at once. Maybe they're short on time, right? But a lot of it is also to see how you interact with others, right? And how you can kind of how you behave and how you interact with others in a group setting. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later when I talk to you about what to do during an interview. But group interviews are great for assessing how you work with others. And then another format that is possible is a panel interview, where it's a little bit more intense in that it is you and an entire panel of interviewers. So not just one person, a hiring manager, right, or a club director. It's you and a panel of like 5 to 6 people, or 5 to 7 people from the organization, who all have questions for you, who are all part of the deciding committee, right? So these are situations that you should prepare for, and understand that it could be any of these, and it could be a combination of them if you are asked to interview more than once. And for some really competitive things out there, like scholarships, for example, you'll probably have more than one interview. Okay, so keep that in mind, but we'll talk a little bit more about specific skills as we move on to the next section. But before we move into what to do during an interview, Monica is going to discuss with you what to do before an interview so that you're well prepared.
I'm back, everybody. Okay, so there's a lot of things that you can do before the interview. I want to cover a few specific ones that I think are really important for you all to do, as for specifically, well, I think these apply to many of types of interviews, so I think they'll be all great for all of you. So before the interview, well, before I cover that, let's do a poll. Let's do one more poll. Okay. So the question is, according to employers, what is the biggest mistake you can make during an interview? So let me know what you think. Is it wearing an inappropriate outfit, forgetting to bring a resume with you, not knowing basic information about the company / organization, being nervous during an interview? Okay, so I'll give you a few more seconds. Okay. All right, I am going to end the poll there. The majority of you have answered, but yeah, most of you got it. So the biggest mistake, according to employers, is that you don't know basic information about the company. That is a big mistake for you to do if the research part should be happening way before even the interview process or before you even preparing for the interview. And I'll explain that in a little, in just a minute, what how you should be preparing for that part. But let's go. I'm glad that most of you have understand at least that is the biggest mistake. Of course, all of these would be mistakes, but that is one of the biggest ones. So in terms of preparation, what I want to start us off with the first impression, right? So before you even have a chance to sit down, if it's an online or, not necessarily for phone interviews, but for if it's in person or online, before you even get asked any questions, they're making already assumptions about you based on the way that you are presenting yourself. So it's really important that you dress the part, especially, if you're doing for something that's really important, like a scholarship or something, or like an admissions, college admissions interview. So it's really important that you dress appropriately. So that is a big mistake for you to do if you dress inappropriately. So it's really important that you plan for that and you prepare for that. Arriving on time, right? Especially for an in-person interview, you want to make sure that you are planning for any travel time. So plan to be there early, so that you have time, to if you get lost. So a big kind of tip that I will give you is to see before even the interview, plan that out, arrive, go check it out before the interview. If you are going in person, check out the area so that you do know where you're going and all of that, because it is really important that you arrive on time. And then of course, come prepared with, a copy of your resume, references, pen, notepad, just as a, just in case, right? You want to have the information with you in case it is requested. And then a notepad and a pen are useful just for you to take some notes if you need to take some notes. Okay, so the other kind of big thing that that we'll probably mention a little bit later too is that you need to practice, right? You need to kind of self-assess too, like what are some of the things that you need to, cover during the interview, especially if the position you're hiring for, like scholarship, you need to know what you're going to be highlighting during that interview process. So in order for you to do that is you need to practice. What you could be practicing is potential interview questions. You can Google, potential interview questions. We have some potential interview questions that we'll go over a little bit later. But also you need to be aware of your body language. So that's why it's important for you to practice in front of somebody. It could be a counselor like us. It could be, a trusted adult. It could be a friend, but you need to be aware of what kinds of things that you do when you are interviewing. For me, for example, I like to pick up my hair when I'm in like stressful situations. So that's something that's really distracting for other people, especially if they're interviewing me in person. That's very distracting, and so that's something I would be very aware of not to do during the interview. So it's really important that you are aware of your body language. So that's part of the preparation before the interview. And then again, research. It is important that you get familiar with the company organization for the position or scholarship or college that you may be interested in. Whatever it is that you're getting interviewed, you need to be well aware of what that company is about, what their culture is about. So let's go to the next slide, B, and kind of cover what you need to research, right? So one more. So you need to research their official website, the mission statement, if they have one, the about us, job description. So find out as much as you can about this company organization, because this is something that, you may be potentially asked, like, why do you want to join this company? Why do you want to come to the school? Why do you think you're a good fit for the scholarship? So it's really important that you are doing your research, you're being intentional. And like I mentioned a little bit earlier, is that ideally this happens before you're in the interviewing stages, right? Before you have been called or emailed telling you that you have an interview. Because ideally, if you apply using a resume or something like that, you tailored that resume for that company. So ideally, you should have already been doing research even before you decided to apply for that scholarship, that college, that company. So this should not be something that you're just doing for the interviewing process. This should be something that you're doing way beforehand. But I do want to stress that it is important that you do a little bit even deeper dive for the, or even just like a refresher, right? When you're preparing for an interview. Because you can bring that really cool things that the company's been doing, for example, in an interview. So also research their social media, search them under the news if that's something that you're interested in. But it's really important that you're very well informed about the company. It demonstrates that you're genuinely interested. It demonstrates that you'll be invested in the success of that company, or you're really invested into, for example, for being part of that college that so it does demonstrate that really key thing that you are actually interested in that position. You're really interested in that scholarship. You're really interested in that college. So that's the main thing that I want you to take away from, before how to prepare for an interview, is to research that company or organization. That's so important. And somebody who doesn't research is definitely going to give a bad impression to whoever's interviewing you. All right. So I think that kind of covers everything regarding preparing. Of course, it's going to be more, but those are the main things that I do want you to keep in mind. So go ahead, B. Thank you all.
Thanks, Monica. And I'm going to reiterate this again. That job description or that scholarship application, whatever it is, right? But let's say job for now. That job description that you get when you're applying for the job, that thing is your key to success. They are literally spelling out everything they need you to do. So your job is to look at that job description and see how you fit into that description. Oh, they need somebody to work a cashier. Well, I'm really good at math. I have an A+ in algebra 2 right now. I can mention that, like math is a strength of mine. Your job is to research for that purpose, right? And I think that job description is one of the key things that's going to get you to stand out in your interview. So let's talk about the interview. Let's talk about what to do during an interview and what that's going to be like. Okay. So let's start with some do's and don'ts. Okay. So interviewing tips first before we go into some more techniques. So let's talk about what you should do during an interview. First of all, this is a conversation. Like I said, it's not an interrogation. I know it's nerve-wracking to be interviewed by somebody, but these are people with families and friends, and they're just trying to get to know you. And the more that you can remember that, and the more that you remember that you're interviewing them, the easier it will be for you to step in to be able to relax, sit down and breathe and take a breath every time you're feeling your heart rate go up a little bit. Hands on lap, couple breaths, smile, right? And take it easy. There's no rush to respond to anything. Smile. Okay. You don't have to smile constantly like a crazy person, but you do want to convey friendliness. Smiling will increase your confidence, right? The act of it will make you feel a little bit more confident. But part of this is likability, right? Think about meeting somebody new, and just getting an impression of them. You like them, you don't like them, they weirded you out, whatever. The interviewing process is gauging kind of your likability. And this actually applies to college admissions too. I've heard college admissions reps tell us, like, we want to like this student, and smiling will help with that. You want to focus on your strengths, right? You might not have every skill that they need in that job description. Some of you might be applying for your first time job ever at El Pollo Loco, right? And you might not have ever worked in fast foods before, but you have that job description. When you applied, you saw what they looked for. Your job is to connect what you have done in your life to that skill set and to apply anything that you've done that is relevant to that job, right? So you're going to focus on all of the strengths that you have, because I know every single one of you in here have strengths. You have things that you're good at, right? You have skills that you have developed over the past 14, 15, 16 years of your life that you can bring to the table. So remember that and highlight those. And we'll talk more about how to do that in a second, okay? Again, remember, this is a conversation. I already mentioned that to you, but it is just people going back and forth with each other, okay? Give yourself time to think. I mentioned this earlier as well. You do not have to respond right off the bat. Just because they ask you a question does not mean that you have to like leap into something. You can take a minute. You can actually tell them, that's a great question. Let me think about that for a minute, and think about it before you respond. That is perfectly acceptable. Okay. Now, if you're in a Zoom meeting or a Zoom interview, you want to make sure that your background is appropriate. Okay, this is really important. I've interviewed students, mock interviewed students via Zoom, and like their closets behind them wide open and hangers are everywhere and it's kind of like disheveled, right? So you want to be mindful of your background. Worst case, you can kind of blur your background if you're using Zoom, but you'll see here in the example on the screen, and if you see me or Monica or anybody presenting today, we're maintaining and we're simulating eye contact. So I have my camera where it's eye level. This is, my laptop is literally on a box right now, right? But I want you to feel like I'm sitting in front of you. You want to simulate that feeling of sitting across from somebody, and you want to make sure that your background is free of clutter and that it's lit well. Okay, so that's really important for a Zoom interview. Really, really important. Don't forget to provide examples. We're going to talk about this more in a second, but you don't want to just answer a question without providing any context or examples to back it up. Like, I'm a hard worker. End of period, or end of sentence, period, right? Like, why do you think you'd be good for the job? Oh, I'm a really hard worker. That doesn't tell them anything. You could be lying for all they know, so you want to be able to back up what you say with examples from what you've done. More on this in a second, okay? You want to match your qualifications to the job. Like I said, that job description, we're going to always refer back to that to make sure that you are tailoring your responses, your resume to what they are looking for. Monica mentioned this earlier, to bring a pen and a notepad. And this is important. This goes back to soft skills, actually, because this is showing that you're conscientious, that you are paying attention to what they're asking. I personally always write down the names of the people interviewing me as I sit down and they introduce themselves, so that when I speak to them and respond to them, I can refer to them by name. That is a really nice touch if you want to be real extra about it, to do that, to indicate to them that you're paying attention and that you are acknowledging them as human beings, as a person, as a unique person. So those are the things that you can also write down too. And if you're in a group interview, you can actually write down the names of your fellow interviewees next to you. It's a really impressive skill when I interview groups of students and one of them will respond and kind of bounce off of another student and mention them by name and say something like, what Rebecca said earlier was really interesting. I agree with her. However, ... right? So just using that pen and paper to kind of jot down names and to remind yourself of things is a really good skill to have as you are interviewing. And finally, final do, right? There are many more, but final do for right now is to be an active listener. We're going back to soft skills. We're going to keep going back to those 21st century skills that you need to be effective as somebody who's going to be entering the world of work, right? Be an active listener means when they are speaking to you, you're making eye contact with them, whether this is on Zoom or in person, you're looking at them, you're nodding, you're showing those nonverbal skills that you're listening, right? But our body language and where we direct our gaze is a really important part of showing people that we are listening to them. Okay, so keep in mind that when you're interviewing with people that you want to acknowledge their presence and look at them and smile and nod so that they know that you're in there in the moment with them. Those are some do's. Let's talk about things that you should not do during an interview, okay? Don't slouch. This applies to online or in person. If you're on the phone, they won't know you're slouching, so you could be slouching if you want. But don't slouch if you're sitting in front of somebody, okay? Body language is really important. Don't cross your arms. That can convey a sense of you shutting them off and you being insecure, right? I would just put my hands folded, right, on the desk, maybe holding a pen, looking like this, looking interested, hands on lap. But we don't want to cross our arms and slouch, okay? We don't want to fidget. We don't want to start clicking pens and tapping. And a lot of students will actually bounce their leg. I've seen that and I've heard it under a table before, right? So something to consider as well. You don't want to spin in your chair. This is probably the #1 offense of high school students, actually, is if they have access to a spinny chair, they will spin in it. So be mindful of your body and your chair. It's fun to spin, but not in an interview. It's very distracting, okay? Don't come in with things in your pockets, keys, your phone, empty pockets. It's kind of weird and cluttered to have things in there. So store it somewhere else, have it in your hand, have it in a bag, in a backpack or something. Actually, I wouldn't bring an entire backpack to an interview, so don't do that, but don't have a bunch of stuff in your pockets, which is a weird thing, but it's actually something that, people notice if you're just jamming a bunch of things in there. Don't wear strong perfume or cologne. You don't want to stand out in that way. It can be really distracting to some people. And some people might be very sensitive to smells. And so you want to be as neutral as possible in that regard, right? So don't forget to do that. Do not speak negatively about anybody, about a former employer, about a former colleague, about a former teacher, right? We are not there to slander anybody or to blame anybody. Speaking negatively about anybody during an interview is a faux pas, and it shows that you are assigning blame to others, and that is the kind of person that you would be, that you would show up and just start slandering somebody else, right? So we're not going to do that. We're going to be as neutral as possible. Even if we've had negative experiences with these types of people in the past, we're going to be as diplomatic about it as possible, right? We're going to be fair and neutral about it while highlighting our strengths and abilities, okay? And finally, don't ask about pay or salary at the end of your interview. They're going to ask you if you have any questions for them. Probably not one of the things that you're going to ask right off the bat is how much am I going to get paid? That is a conversation that can happen after. And for many of you, that will be posted on the application itself. So not something that we're going to ask about, okay? Quickly, because there's more that we're going to cover, these are some questions that you might be asked. We're actually going to share a document with you of common interview questions so that you can begin to practice them yourself with the skills that I'm going to discuss with you shortly, okay? But some questions from them, very common questions, are things like, tell us about yourself. Boy, is that a vague question, right? And we'll talk about how to formulate this in a second. But the tell us about yourself question is going to be a summary of you that is tailored to the position, okay? Not just like a general thing. You kind of want to tailor the about yourself to how you tie into that job, right? And how your strengths might play into a really good relationship between you and this organization. They'll ask you about your strengths, maybe about your greatest weaknesses, things that you're interested in as far as the company is concerned, right? For scholarships, they're going to ask you things like, where do you see yourself in 10 years? Let's pretend that there's a press conference about you in 15 years. What is it going to be about? They're trying to gauge what your aspirations are, right? What your hopes are. So again, we'll touch on this in a second on how the exercises that I'm going to just describe to you in a minute can apply to a lot of these types of questions, okay? But don't worry about the specific questions. We're going to send you a list so that you have them to kind of look at them later. But they're also going to ask you questions that you have for them. And you should have questions for an organization. Don't just say, I don't have any questions, right? Be curious. Like Monica said earlier, do your research so that you are curious and excited about the company. And you can ask things like, what are some of the challenges that you're facing and how can I help to address that, right? How can I be a part of the solution? What do you love about this organization or your job, right? What do you think are some of your greatest accomplishments as a team? This is showing your curiosity in the organization and also you trying to see yourself as a part of it as well, which is really important, okay? But just some things to think about, and we can also help you brainstorm this if you have specific things that you're actually applying for, okay, and interviewing for. So before we move on to technique, the biggest takeaway for you to understand for the interview process is to know yourself. If you have a strong sense of what you have achieved and of what you're good at, you can answer almost any question, okay? But it does start with having a strong sense of what makes you tick in this world and some things that you're really proud of that you've done that you can speak to. If you have those two things, you'll be able to answer a lot of questions. I've worked personally with students using this technique, and they've fared very well in scholarship interviews and in job interviews and in college interviews. Okay, so let's see what that kind of looks like. First of all, to know yourself, you want to assess yourself a little bit, right? One of the things you want to have sense of is what you value. You can bring this to the table in your interview questions, but what do you value? What is important to you? What motivates you to do anything? Why do you get up and go to school and try to get good grades? Why are you at an interviewing webinar tonight on a Monday? You must be pretty ambitious or curious as a student, right? But what is it that's making you tick? Are you driven? Are you curious? Do you value achievement? Do you value community, family, school, education, right? Think of something in your mind right now that's really important to you. When you understand that, you can bring that to the table and answer. I really value education, and I understand the power of it. That's why I've applied to this university, because I know that it gives great opportunities for first generation students, right? But that statement began with understanding what makes me operate in this world and why I do anything. And when you can answer something based on values, that will bring a lot of depth to your response, because then you know what's driving you and they see that in you as well. Another thing that you want to start thinking about is what you're good at. Of course, like I said, you want to play to your strengths. What are you really good at? What are some hard skills that you have that you're really good at? Can you type super fast? Are you really good at math? Are you an amazing athlete? Do you take care of a parent or guardian or grandparent at home, or a sibling, right? Are you a really good caretaker? Are you really good at time management, right? What are some of the things that you have accomplished that you're proud of, that you're really good at? This is really important for you to assess, because strengths and being strengths focused in an interview can go a long way. Okay, so what motivates you in the world? What are your values? What are you good at? What are your strengths, right? So think about that after tonight. Third, what's your temperament, right? What is your kind of mode of operation in the world, right? In other words, what's your personality? Are you a curious person? Are you a really empathetic person who cares a lot about other people? What is it that drives your personality, right? Because you can start, if you start thinking about that, you can identify how you act that way in groups and use that in an example in a response for an interview, right? I'm an incredibly empathetic person. I care deeply about the people around me. I've volunteered at my local, senior housing facility to provide leisure activities and accompaniment to senior citizens in my community, right? But understanding your personality will also help kind of feed your responses and give them more depth. Okay, so another big takeaway, above and beyond assessing yourself and like your personality, which is what we were just talking about, is accomplishments. This is a big one. This is one of the biggest things I can recommend to any student. If you're preparing for an interview, think of 1 to 3 major accomplishments, that you have achieved between, let's say, freshman year and now, okay? And if you're younger than 8th grade to now, 1 to 3. It might be 1, it might be 2, it might be 3. It could be winning an award, Student of the Month. It could be helping a friend study for a test. It could be, running for sophomore class president and winning. It could be so many things, right? And it looks differently for all of us. I want you to think of 2 to 3, preferably, accomplishments or roles that you have obtained, or roles that you've earned over time, and think about those in depth. Think about those situations and think, did I solve a problem during that time? Did I lead in any way? Did I work in a team, right? Whatever accomplishment it is that you have, they are tied to these types of things, right? You got there by working in a team, by demonstrating work ethic, right? By overcoming a challenge. But the first step is to think about 3 things that you're really proud of that you've achieved. It could be small, it could be huge, right? But we want to be able to tap into those experiences so that you can always return to those for an example to respond to pretty much any question. If you really flesh out those experiences, you'll be able to explain leadership roles within that experience, or teamwork, or overcoming an obstacle. These are very common interview type questions. So if you have these in the back of your mind, if you have a bank of accomplishments, you can draw from them to provide concrete examples when you're asked a question. Okay, that is the goal, is to be able to tap into that. Now, the STAR interviewing technique, it's an acronym, STAR, right? And it stands for situation, task, action, and result. Okay, so a really good way to respond to an interview question is to use this technique. And you'll get these slides after tonight so that you can look at this in more depth. But if they ask you a question, like we said, you want to provide an example. Okay, so the STAR technique is this. S stands for situation. So if they ask you a question, right? Like describe a time that you overcame an obstacle, right? Let's say that. So you're going to start with the situation. You have to explain what the situation was, right? So the situation maybe was that your club was selling food to fundraise at a school event, right? And then you found out the night before that another club was going to sell the exact same food that your club was going to sell. Let's just say that that's the example, right? So I found out the night before that this other club was going to sell the same food, and we had to do something about it because we didn't want to compete for that funding. So the task, you name the situation, then you name the task. What did you do? Describe the task that you had to take on. What were the challenges? What were the constraints? What were the deadlines? So your task for that situation was to try to troubleshoot the fact that you and another club were selling the same food the next day and you didn't want to compete for funding, right? Okay, great. That was the task. So what was the action? This is the big part. What did you do about it? Right? Did you work in a team? Did you provide initiative or leadership? So maybe in this situation, and this is a real situation actually that a student told me about, but maybe in this situation, you actually called up the president of the club that night and said, hey, this is the situation. I want both of us to raise money, but we're going to create competition for each other if we're selling the same thing. We have already placed our order for food. It sounds like you haven't. Would you consider selling something else since you have a better location in the event? Would you consider doing that so that we could sell different foods? In this situation, they agreed. It was problem solved. It was beautiful, right? But that is the action. You want to describe what you did in that moment. And then finally, you want to end with the result. What came of all of this work that you put into this particular situation? Well, the result was that everybody made money. They sold out all of their foods for both clubs, and they raised a lot of funding for an important cause, right? So this is how you can use the STAR method to give a really in-depth answer, right? This takes practice, but you can use this. Think about any accomplishment, like I said, and think about it in the context of that question. What did you do to solve a problem? Or what did you do? Describe a time that you worked as a team member or as a leader. You could use any of those questions and start mapping out your response by describing the situation, what had to be done, what you did about it, and what the outcome was. That's a great way to respond to a question. Okay, so that was a lot, but this is one slide to remember, I think, and to try to use to practice as you think about answering your interview questions. Okay, like I said, having an understanding of yourself and a couple key accomplishments is going to lead to a really fruitful interview for you, okay? And that's gonna start with some brainstorming, maybe writing stuff down and reflecting a little bit, but this is gonna be the key to you having really solid responses that you don't have to rehearse or remember because they're drawing from personal experience. With that, I'm gonna pass this back to Monica to tell you what to do after the interview is over.
Yeah, and I wanted to add a little bit more, like if you master the STAR method, it's going to help you so much. It's going to make a huge difference with demonstrating, you know, all those soft skills that we mentioned. So it's very likely that with, you know, if you go to an interview for like a job or a career, they're going to ask you like a situation question. They're going to ask you to, or a problem solving question. So it's very important that you practice that method if, so that you can answer those questions and you can demonstrate effectively that you do have the skill sets, that you do have those strengths that, that they're looking for. So that's how they typically, you know, see if you have those soft skills that they're looking for. So it's really important that you remember that method so that you can practice and master it, because it's going to help you out a lot with any kind of interview. So that was a lot, but after the interview, one of the key things that I hope that you take away from this is that you want to leave a good impression. Sending a thank you note and email within 24 hours makes a huge impact, especially with, with that little image, as you can see, is that 1 in 20 job seekers send a thank you, after a job interview. So not a lot of people do this. It's not like a standard practice. A lot of people do it, but as you can see, that's from Live Career that this is not something that's very common, especially, with younger employees. So it's going to make a big impression for you to send them a thank you email, let them know how much you appreciated their time, letting them know, reemphasize your interest, express more excitement, and if you want to, you can ask them a couple of questions or reference something specific that came up during the interview. So it just sets you up for letting them know that you're genuinely interested and that you were taking the extra time to let them know that you are really thankful for the opportunity, for you to demonstrate, how awesome and amazing you are. So yeah, so that's one of the things that I definitely want you to take away, is that I encourage you all to do that for college admissions, for scholarships, or anything, because it just gives the interviewer a really good impression, a really nice feeling. We've had people, one of our the fourth part of this series is the mock interviews, and we work with a lot of our different local community partners, and they always let us know when a student has emailed them and let them know that they thank them for this is just a mock interview, this is just a practice interview, and students are taking that step of thanking their interviewers, and interviewers do let us know and tell us that they are really impressed with our students because they took that additional step. So it's a really nice way for you to leave a good impression. So the other thing too is that you want to evaluate your performance, right? For every interview, you want to kind of assess and say, like, what stumped me, what kind of questions did they ask that I couldn't, provide a really useful answer. What other things did I forget to highlight that I can highlight on my next interview? So it's really important that you also take that step, and it's also that's why it's useful to have a notepad with you, so that it's fresh in your mind. You can write that stuff down. But it's really important that you evaluate yourself and say, I forgot to mention this, or I wasn't able to I felt like I wasn't effectively communicating that situation, or gave enough context, or next time I need to be more relaxed. Next time I need to do a little bit more research. So it's really important that you self-evaluate, so that you can perform a little bit better at your next interview if you do have more interviews. Let's see, let's keep going. So, we're wrapping up. We have a few more things, and we might wrap up early. But one of the things that the key points that I want to make sure that we emphasize is that you want to do research for the organization or position. You want to be somebody who's walking into an interview and knowing well, because it does give you more confidence, right? Going into that interview, if you're knowledgeable about the company, if you're knowledgeable about the organization, if you're knowledgeable about the position, you can reference all those things during the interview. And I do think that it gives you more confidence as you walk into that interview. You want to understand a job description or the role, right? You don't want to walk in there without having a clear understanding of what you're signing up for, whether it's, a scholarship or, or a job. You want to make sure that you have a deep understanding of that opportunity, so that you can, again, reference that during the interview, and you also know confidently what you're walking into. I know B also mentioned, you want to highlight those really accomplishments. So make sure that you're practicing, you're preparing, right? Examples. If you need to write them down, write them down. But you definitely need to have 2 to 3 detailed examples, something that you can support your answers. As we mentioned, it's not useful. You just say, I'm a great worker, or I am detail oriented. Like, it doesn't help if you don't give specific examples for us to have evidence that you are actually those things that that you're claiming to be. Just like with college essays, we often read college essays and students will say, I'm perfect for this school because X, Y, and Z, but they don't give us evidence for that. How are we supposed to know that you're actually those things without actually giving us, specific examples from your experience that support your claims? And And all of you do amazing things that you can definitely provide examples for. You know, even having a hobby, taking care of, as we mentioned, like one of your family members. Those are really things that you can provide examples for. You know, you can say if you have a hobby that you're, you know, if you have a hobby with, you know, with art, then you can say you're creative, that you think outside the box. So those are all really specific examples that you can bring up. And all of you have really great things that you're working on. And if you, again, like we mentioned, if you need help with gauging those things, come to see us. So that you can have those examples and reference them as you're, you know, you're preparing for the interview. I've had students come in, as we mentioned, and they want to practice interviews with me. And those are the kinds of things that I ask them to prepare for me before they come for an interview. I tell them, you know, give me specific examples of you demonstrating specific skills that are outlined in that job description or that opportunity that they're looking at. And again, practice, practice, practice. You can practice with us, trusted adult, as I mentioned, with friends, with the family member. It's really important that you get comfortable. As we mentioned, this is a conversation, right? It shouldn't be, you know, where you're so nervous that you can't operate, that you can't speak. It is essentially a conversation where both of you, both parties involved, are gauging to see if it's a good fit. So go in it with, you know, with that in mind, that it is a conversation. It is something that you know, you'll get, and of course, nerves are normal, but if you practice, you'll feel more confident. So with that being said, I think we can move on. Let's do another poll and see how you all feel now. Hopefully a little bit better. If not, of course, we're here to support. So go ahead and let me know on a scale from 1 to 5, how prepared do you feel to handle the interviewing process after, you know, we've shared all of that hopefully useful information for all of you. Okay. We're gonna wait a little bit more for a few more of you to answer. Okay. All right, I'm gonna end the poll. Yay, okay, I think I see a big improvement from earlier. Most of you were neutral and now most of you feel prepared, which is amazing. I'm glad that this was helpful for a lot of you. But ideally, you know, we want to make sure that you all feel a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more confident about this process, because there's so many benefits with being comfortable with the interviewing process. Again, it's not just for, you know, for what happens during high school. It's also something that you're going to be using. It's a skill that you're going to be using probably throughout most of your life. So it's really important that you feel a little bit more confident. And if you don't, that's something that you can work on for sure. Okay, let's keep going. And an opportunity where you can work on this, you know, is to join us for our last part of this career success sequence series. We are going to be holding a professional online mock interview. So these are going to be held on Zoom. We are going to be partnering with business community members, different professionals. You'll be getting live feedback and valuable interviewing, you know, feedback. So it is a really cool opportunity for you to start practicing some of the skills that you might have gained today, or to continue to practice the, you know, your interviewing skills. It is open to all grade levels of high school. And then we encourage you to submit an updated resume so that whoever's interviewing you can provide more feedback for your resume so that it could be an even better resume. That is optional though, so you can join us without a resume. And if you do need help with creating your resume, we did a webinar also on how to develop an effective resume. So that's also on our YouTube channel. So if you want to check that out as you're preparing for this event, it is going to be held on Monday, May 23rd at 6 to 7, from 6 to 7:30, and it's going to be online. You can register on our website. It's a really cool kind of opportunity where you will get somebody to kind of guide you and provide you with an opportunity for you to practice these skills, whether you're preparing for a scholarship interview or a college admissions interview. And then this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube channel as well, which is also on our website. All that information is on our website. All right, so I think we have one more. Yeah. So we are going to be sharing the slides. So you will be able to click through these links, including some sample interview questions. So if you want to start getting practice with that, you can access that resource. So we will be sharing the slides with you so that you can review those and see which ones will be helpful for you. We provided more resources for resume building, for paragraphs for your resume, interviewing tips. So it's a wealth of resources for all of you. And I think that's it. If y'all have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A. I see some of you are popping them in the chat, which is also okay. Let me share the slides with all of you, and then you can pop in your questions in the Q&A as we're sharing information. But thank you all for joining us this evening. If you don't have any questions, you are free to go. Enjoy the rest of your Monday evening. We'll hang out for a little bit to answer any questions.
Please join us for the mock interviews. It's a safe, low stakes environment for you to practice these skills with a professional who provides you a ton of feedback. It'll get the jitters of your first interview out of the way so that you can go into your first real interview with confidence. And thank you, everybody. And you can go.
So I put the link in the chat for the slides and the resources. So if you want to access those, click on that. Oh, actually, let me send it to everybody. Here we go. There we go. So that is there for you. Thank you all for joining us this evening. If there are no questions, have a great night.
Thank you, everybody.